For 10 years, I worked tirelessly. Double shifts, no holidays, living on the bare minimum, all to achieve a single goal: to buy my own house. Not just any house, but the one I had dreamed of since I was a teenager. In the neighborhood of Muca, in São Paulo, a simple two-story house, but one that to me represented the world. Each brick symbolized my sacrifices. When I finally received the keys, I stood on the doorstep and wept. Not from exhaustion, but from an overwhelming pride at having built something that no one could take from me, or so I thought. My relationship with my parents was always complicated. I was born and raised in Ribeirão Preto, a city in the countryside of São Paulo, in a middle-class family. My father, Mr. Antonio, worked as a bank branch manager, and my mother, Mrs. Teresa, was a teacher. They believed in supporting my sister, Marcia, unconditionally, while I was expected to fend for myself. I never complained. I saw it as part of being the oldest son. They helped her through college, paid her rent, even bought her a car. And me? I was on my own since I was 18. I remember the day I left home to try my luck in the capital. My father patted me on the back and said, "Figure it out, son. A real man builds his own path." At the time, I interpreted it as a vote of confidence. Today, I understand it as abandonment disguised as a life lesson. I started as an administrative assistant at a construction company. I lived in a cramped little room in Itaquera, sharing a bathroom with 6 people. The smell of mold on the walls woke me up every morning. I studied at night, and I worked odd jobs on the weekends. I went hungry a few times, but I never asked for help. Pride, maybe, or just the certainty that there was no point in calling home. Little by little, I moved up. I became an assistant, then an analyst, and finally a project manager. My salary improved, but my habits stayed the same. I didn't go out to expensive bars like my colleagues. I didn't travel on vacation, and I didn't buy designer clothes. Every penny went into my savings, the fund for my house. I didn't hold a grudge, at least not until they showed up at my doctor, smiling politely, saying they wanted me to transfer the deed to Marcia. "She has 2 children now, Paulo," my mother explained, as if she were talking about the weather. "Her apartment is too small. You're single, you can start over easily." I just stood there looking at the coffee I had served them, thinking it was some kind of bad joke. But their faces were serious. "Are you asking me to give away the only thing I've built in my life to Marcia? The house that took me 10 years to buy?" "We're not asking," my father said, crossing his arms. "We're reminding you of your duty to the family. Your sister needs it more than you do." I refused calmly. I explained that I loved my niece and nephew, that Marcia would always be welcome to visit, but that the house was mine. That's when everything fell apart. My father got up from the table, his face red. "You've always been selfish, Paulo, always thinking only of yourself." Weeks later, I received court papers. My own parents were suing me, claiming that the house was family property and that I had agreed verbally to let my sister live in it permanently. It was a lie, and that broke something inside me. The night I received the summons, I sat, alone in the backyard looking at the neighbors' windows, old Mr. Geraldo, who was watering his ferns. He waved, as he always did. "Everything all right, Paulo?" "Everything's fine," I replied automatically, but it wasn't. For the first time since I moved to São Paulo, I cried not from joy or pride, but from disappointment. The family I was still trying to impress, even from a distance, was now dragging me to court. Why? Because I had the audacity to achieve something on my own, because I wouldn't bow down when they demanded that I hand over my hard work on a silver platter. The Barra Funda courthouse felt like an alien place that Tuesday morning. I had been there a few times for work, but I never imagined I'd be sitting as the defendant, defending myself from my own family. The air conditioning made the room too cold, or maybe it was just the knot in my stomach that was consuming me from within. My parents sat on the other side, not once looking in my direction. My sister Marcia was also there, cradling little Lucas, who was only 8 months old. The older one, Felipe, 4 years old, was at daycare. From time to time, she would shoot me looks of contempt, as if I were a monster for not giving her my house. I hired a modest lawyer, Dr. Pereira, a 60-something gentleman I met through a work colleague's recommendation. He charged a price I could afford. My parents, on the other hand, came with a family law specialist in an impeccable suit and genuine leather briefcase. Dr. Menezes was known for representing wealthy families in inheritance disputes. From his opening statement, he painted a picture where I was the insensitive villain stealing a roof from a mother and her innocent children. The defendant verbally promised his sister that she could take up permanent residence in the property in question. Dr. Menezes stated with a confidence that made me nauseous. There are witnesses to this family agreement. The witnesses were my aunts, cousins, and even Marcia's godfather. They all repeated the same fabricated story, that during a Sunday lunch 2 years ago I had said that the house would always be available for Marcia and the kids. What really happened was that when she separated from her husband, I offered my sofa bed for a few weeks until she got back on her feet. That gesture of kindness was now being turned into some kind of lifelong contract. Dr. Pereira tried to counter as best he could, presenting bank statements, payment receipts, the deed with only my name on it. But with each hearing, I felt we were losing ground. The judge, Dr. Claudio Mendonça, a man with a neutral expression and attentive eyes, listened to everything in silence, making occasional notes. "Mr. Paulo," Dr. Menezes asked me during the interrogation, "don't you think it's cruel to deny shelter to your own nephews when you have a 3-bedroom house all to yourself?" Before I could answer, my lawyer intervened, claiming leading the witness. The judge agreed, but the damage was already done. I saw my mother wiping away a discreet tear, theatrically positioned for the exact moment the judge looked in her direction. During a recess, I found Marcia in the hallway. I tried to approach her. "Marcia, why are you doing this? We could have talked." She adjusted the baby in her arms and replied without looking me in the eyes. "You've always had it easier, Paulo. You were always the favorite, even living far away. Now that I really need help, you're turning your back on me." I was paralyzed, unable to process such an inversion of reality. The favorite? Me? The same one who left home at 18 with a backpack and 200 reais in my pocket? The same one who spent years sending money to help with the household expenses, even when I barely had enough for myself. "You're wrong," was all I could say before she walked away. With each new court session, I felt more empty. I wasn't just defending my property. I was fighting for my dignity, for the validation of my effort. My colleagues at work started to notice my dejection. Ricardo, my manager, even offered me a few days off, which I refused. Work was the only normal thing I had left. One night, after another exhausting day in court, I received an unexpected call from my godfather, Uncle João. He hadn't appeared as a witness, the only family member who had remained neutral. "Paulo, my son, I know you're being wronged," he said in his raspy voice. "Your grandfather would be proud of your strength." Those words were like a bomb. My grandfather, Geraldo, my mother's father, had been a bricklayer his whole life. He built his own house brick by brick, working on weekends. He passed away when I was 14, but his calloused hands and honest smile remained alive in my memory. The day before the final hearing, I made a decision. I called Dr. Pereira to my apartment and said I wanted to speak to the judge personally, without intermediaries. He tried to dissuade me, explaining the risks, but my mind was made up. "I have nothing to lose but the truth," I stated, "and they've already tried to take that from me." When the judge authorized me to speak, I got up with shaky legs and a dry throat. The courtroom seemed to spin around me. I caught a glimpse of Dr. Pereira's worried look, my family's lawyer's confident smile, and my parents' impassive faces. I took a deep breath, adjusted the only suit I owned, bought 3 years ago for a colleague's wedding, and looked directly at Dr. Claudio Mendonça. "Your Honor," I began, my voice initially trembling, but gaining firmness with each word. "I worked for 10 years to buy that house. No one else contributed a single cent. My name is on the deed. I paid every single mortgage payment, every renovation, every tax. And now I'm being accused of cruelty because I didn't want to give up the only thing I built for myself? I paused, trying to control my emotions. The silence in the room was absolute. I left Ribeirão Preto at 18 with 200 reais in my pocket. I lived in a boarding house, shared a room with strangers, and saved every penny. Meanwhile, my parents were paying for my sister's private college, they bought her a car, and they furnished her first apartment. I never complained. I understood that I was the oldest son, that I had to fend for myself. But now they're saying my house actually belongs to the family? I glanced at my parents. My father kept his chin up, proud even in that situation. My mother stared at the floor. When my sister separated, I opened the doors of my house to her and my nephew, who was just a baby at the time. I slept on the sofa for 3 months so she could have the room. I helped her look for an apartment, and I even lent her money for the deposit. And now they're using that gesture against me, turning kindness into an obligation? The judge watched me intently, without showing any emotion. I continued, "Your Honor, I love my family. I love my nephews. But love doesn't mean you have to erase yourself. If this court decides that a man can lose his home because he once opened his doors to help, then what's the point of working, sacrificing, or dreaming?" There was a prolonged silence in the room. The judge leaned back in his chair, lightly tapping his pen against his document folder. Then, calmly, he turned to my parents' lawyer and asked a simple question. "Dr. Menezes, can you show any legal or written agreement stating that the house is shared or was promised to Ms. Marcia Silva?" The lawyer hesitated, picking up some papers from his briefcase. "Your Honor, we have here statements from witnesses who confirm the verbal commitment made by the defendant during a family lunch in July 2021. Witnesses who are all relatives of the plaintiff," the judge observed, flipping through his notes. "Any signed documents? Any bank transfers that prove the family's participation in the acquisition of the property? Family obligations are not always documented, Your Honor. This is a moral commitment." "Doctor," the judge interrupted, "this court deals with the law, not with feelings. I am requesting all documents related to the house. Bank statements, mortgage records, deeds, everything." That question, a simple sentence, turned the entire case around. The burden of proof had shifted, and at that moment, I felt the tide turning. During the recess, I sat alone on a bench in the hallway. I saw my sister crying on my mother's shoulder. My father was talking intensely with the lawyer, gesturing. I closed my eyes, exhausted. I thought of my grandfather Giraldo, of his calloused hands building his own house on weekends. "A man's house is his castle, Paulo," he used to say. "No one has the right to take that away from you." When the session resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Dr. Menezes seemed less confident. He presented some documents, but they were just family photos and decontextualized text messages, nothing substantial. Dr. Pereira, on the other hand, displayed an organized folder with all my receipts, the financing contract, the monthly payments, the taxes, all in my name. The court also requests a review of the financial assistance provided by Mr. Antonio and Mrs. Teresa Silva to their children over the past 5 years, the judge declared, to everyone's surprise. 2 weeks later, that analysis revealed, through bank statements, that my parents had spent over 150,000 reais on my sister during that period. In contrast, they had contributed nothing to me since I left home. When asked about the reason, my father simply said, he never needed help. That sentence hit me like a slap. I never needed help because they never offered any. I survived without it. But that didn't make me any less deserving. The judge nodded slowly and said, "This case is not about family disputes. It's about property rights, and on that matter there is no ambiguity. The house belongs exclusively to the defendant, Mr. Paulo Silva." I couldn't breathe. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a mourning. Mourning for a family that perhaps had never existed in the way I had imagined. When I left the room, my sister walked past me carrying the baby, without saying a word. My mother looked at me briefly, her eyes red before moving on. My father remained seated, staring into space. Dr. Pereira squeezed my shoulder. You did what you had to do, Paulo. Yeah, I replied, feeling a strange weight in my chest. But at what cost? After the judge's pointed question, everything fell apart for my parents and my sister. Dr. Menezes tried to change his strategy, claiming a moral obligation, but courts deal with laws, not with feelings. When the judge requested all the documentation regarding the house, it became clear that the case was leaning in my favor. Every paper, every document showed only my name. It was indisputable. I spent sleepless nights reviewing old bank statements, gathering payment receipts, and organizing everything in carefully labeled folders. I remembered the times I worked overtime to cover a higher installment, the months I ate instant noodles to save money, all to prove the obvious that the house was mine, earned with my sweat. A week later, Dr. Pereira called me with a surprising piece of news. The judge had ordered something unexpected, a full review of all financial assistance given by my parents to both children over the past 5 years. Bank documents, transfers, substantial gifts, everything would be analyzed. Is that good or bad? I asked, confused. It's unusual, Dr. Pereira replied. But I believe the judge wants to understand your family's pattern of behavior. It could be a positive thing for us. And it was. In the next hearing, an accounting expert presented a detailed report. It came to light, through bank statements, that my parents had spent over 150,000 reais on Marcia in the last 5 years. Rent payments, private school for Felipe, new furniture after the divorce, medical treatments, and even a trip to Porto Seguro to help her get over the separation. In contrast, they had contributed nothing to me since I left home. My father shifted in his chair when the judge questioned this disparity. His face was red. A vein pulsed on his temple. Can you explain this difference in treatment between your children, Mr. Antonio? The judge asked. My father looked at the judge with that expression I knew so well, the one of someone who won't admit they're wrong. He never needed help, he replied dryly. Dr. Mendonça removed his glasses, slowly wiped the lenses, and put them back on before continuing. Did you ever offer help to your oldest son? Silence. My father looked away. My mother nervously fiddled with her purse. No, he finally answered. Paulo was always independent. That sentence hit me like a punch to the gut. I never needed help because they never offered any. I had survived on my own, not by choice, but out of necessity. Independence wasn't my virtue, it was my need. The court also discovered something that surprised me. After her divorce, Marcia received a considerable pension from her ex-husband, Fernando, something she had hidden during the process. The money she claimed not to have to rent a bigger apartment existed, but she was saving it for the children's future, according to her testimony. That's when I understood. It wasn't about need, but about convenience. My house was 2 blocks from the private school where Felipe studied, and 3 blocks from the office where my mother took her grandchildren for occupational therapy weekly. It was the perfect location to make their lives easier, not a matter of survival as they tried to portray it. During the break, I met my Uncle João in the hallway. He had been called as a neutral witness. Your father was always a very proud man, he said, offering me a cigarette that I refused. When you left home and managed to fend for yourself, he interpreted it as you not needing him. Instead of pride, he felt diminished. And that justifies trying to take my house? It doesn't justify it, Uncle João sighed, but it explains it. People do terrible things when they feel their own worth is threatened. At the final hearing, Judge Claudio Mendonça entered the room with a severe expression. He flipped through his documents for a few minutes in silence while we all waited tense. This court, he finally began, is not here to resolve family feuds or to balance perceptions of past injustices. Our function is to apply the law. And, in this specific case, the law is clear. He looked directly at me. The house in question legally belongs to the defendant, Mr. Paulo Silva. There is no ambiguity on that point. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in months. The judge continued, However, I would like to make an observation. Families are built on more than legal obligations. They are built on trust, mutual respect, and honest communication. I see little of that in this case. He looked at everyone in the room. My sentence is that the property remains the exclusive property of Mr. Paulo Silva, and the court costs will be paid by the plaintiff. When the gavel struck, I didn't feel joy, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep emptiness, as if I had won a battle but lost something much more valuable in the process. I looked at my parents and my sister on the other side of the room. We were strangers now, united only by a last name and increasingly distant memories. The judge was right. I had kept my house, but at what cost? The family I knew, however imperfect it was shattered, and rebuilding those ties would be much more difficult than building 4 walls and a roof. The court's decision sent shockwaves through the family. Marcia left the courtroom in tears, carrying little Lucas in her arms. My mother didn't look at me. My father, for the first time, seemed small, shrunk by the weight of his own pride. I left alone, just as I had arrived. But something inside me had changed. A bond had been broken. The connection I had spent my life trying to preserve was now just threads of memory. I returned home in a strange state of numbness. It wasn't victory. It wasn't defeat. It was like waking up from a long and confusing dream without knowing exactly what was real. I opened the door to my 2-story house in Muka and looked at it with new eyes. This place that I had worked so hard to acquire now carried the weight of a shattered family. In the following weeks, I didn't hear from them. No phone calls, no messages, no attempt at an explanation or apology. I went back to my work routine, but something had changed. My colleagues noticed my silence, my distraction. Ricardo, my boss, called me for coffee. "Are you okay, Paulo? You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." I told him a summarized version of the story. He listened without interrupting, stirring his now cold coffee with his spoon. "You know," he finally said, "my father used to say that family is like a mirror. When it breaks, you can glue the pieces back together, but you'll always see the crack. Do you think it can't be fixed?" I didn't say that, just that it will never be the same as before. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. I saw on Facebook that Marcia had moved into our Aunt Lourdes' house in Campinas. She posted cryptic phrases about betrayal and how blood didn't mean loyalty. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I blocked her. After the 3rd hint, unable to deal with any more drama. I spent those weeks doing small renovations on the house, painting, gardening, replacing a few burnt-out outlets. It was my way of reclaiming the space, of marking it as mine again. I bought plants for the balcony, and I set up a small garden in the backyard. Every improvement was an affirmation. This house is mine. I earned it fairly. I deserve to be here. But peace isn't instantaneous. It's something you rebuild, brick by brick, just like a house. One Saturday afternoon, while pruning the small lemon tree I had planted in the backyard, I received an unexpected visit. It was Uncle João with a bottle of artisanal cachaça under his arm. "I came to see how my nephew is doing," he said without ceremony, "and to bring a remedy for the soul." We sat on the balcony, drinking slowly, watching the quiet street. Kids were playing ball on the sidewalk. Someone was barbecuing a few houses down. A normalcy that seemed almost offensive after everything that had happened. "They're talking to me again," Uncle João commented after the 2nd glass. "Your father is quieter than ever. Your mother cries when no one is looking. And Marcia? Marcia is like your father, too proud to admit when she's wrong." We were silent for a while, just listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. A car drove by playing old samba music. A dog barked in response. "You know," Uncle João continued, "your grandfather Geraldo went through something similar. His brother, my Uncle Augusto, tried to take the house he built when your grandmother got sick. He said he needed the money for her treatment. That surprised me. I had never heard that story." "And what happened?" "Your grandfather resisted. He said he would sell a plot of land he had in the countryside. But the house where he raised his children was sacred. It caused a rift in the family that lasted for years. He took another sip. But time is a strange remedy, Paolo. People change, they get older, they gain perspective. Are you saying I should forgive them? I'm saying that resentment is a poison you drink hoping the other person will die. He smiled faintly. But I'm also not the one who almost lost my house. Sometimes in the months that followed, I would sit on the balcony with a beer, looking at the street, imagining how things could have been different. If they had asked, not demanded, if they had respected me, not assumed I owed them something. But regrets are just shadows, and I was tired of chasing them. On my nephew Felipe's birthday, I sent a gift through the mail, a science kit I thought he would like. I wasn't invited to the party, but I received a photo of him smiling with the gift sent by my mother. It was the first direct communication from her in 4 months. Just the photo, no message. But it was something. The following week, I received a text message from my father. Short, like everything he said. Your mother's house roof is leaking. Do you know anyone who can fix it? I could have ignored it. Part of me wanted to do exactly that. But I replied with the number of Zay, a bricklayer who had helped me with some renovations. My father just replied, thanks. These were small steps, timid attempts at reconnection. There were no grandiose apologies, no dramatic reconciliations, like in the movies. Just crumbs of communication, fragile bridges being rebuilt over a chasm of hurt. I began to realize that family isn't a fixed, immutable thing. It's a relationship in constant negotiation, with boundaries that need to be set and respected. Maybe now, after the storm, we could build something new. Not based on unspoken expectations or imposed obligations, but on conscious choices and mutual respect. The house was still mine, but it was no longer a battlefield. It was starting to be, once again, just a home. A few months after the trial, I received a letter from the court clerk's office. When I saw the official envelope, my heart raced. For a moment, I thought my parents had appealed the decision. I opened it with trembling hands, preparing myself for another battle. But it wasn't that. It was a notification about a restitution clause buried in an old family will, that of my grandfather Geraldo. He had left a provision stating that any property acquired exclusively through a direct descendant's own effort could never be claimed by the family under coercion. It had never been used before, but it was still valid. I had not only won the house, I had an ancestral right to it. The old man knew what he was doing, Uncle João murmured when I showed him the letter, during one of our Sunday get-togethers that had become routine. Geraldo saw his own brother lose everything to the family and swore that his grandchildren wouldn't go through the same thing. It was poetic in a way. My grandfather, a man I barely knew, had protected me in silence across time. He had understood the importance of property, of building something that no one could take from you. I framed a copy of that clause and hung it in my office. Not out of revenge, but as a reminder that justice, though slow, is not always blind. That night I dreamed of my grandfather. We were in an empty lot and he was showing me how to lay bricks, his calloused hands guiding mine. The foundation is the most important part, Paolo, he said in the dream. If the foundation is solid, the house can withstand any storm. I woke up with a strange sense of peace, as if something had finally clicked into place. I spent the next day reorganizing my office, where I found an old photo, me at 12, sitting next to my grandfather on a park bench in Ribeirão. He was smiling in his quiet way, an arm over my shoulders. We were alike, I realized for the first time. The same chin, the same determined look. The following week, I received an unexpected phone call from my mother. Paolo? Her voice sounded hesitant, as if she expected me to hang up. How are you, son? The conversation was brief, superficial. We talked about the weather, work, nothing substantial, but it was a start. Before hanging up, she mentioned something about the will clause. Your grandfather always said you were just like him, she commented. Stubborn as a mule, but fair, to the end. 3 weeks later, My father called me for the first time since the trial. It was an even shorter and more awkward conversation. He didn't apologize, not explicitly, but he invited me to a barbecue on Sunday. "Just family," he said. "Marcia won't be there." I accepted with reservations. I drove to Ribeirão that Sunday, my heart heavy with contradictory expectations. My parents' house seemed smaller than I remembered. The garden, once impeccable under my mother's care, showed signs of neglect. There were fewer flowers, more weeds. My father was at the grill when I arrived, flipping pieces of picanha with excessive concentration. We greeted each other with a formal handshake. My mother hugged me quickly, then rushed back to the kitchen to check on the mayonnaise. It was a strange lunch, full of uncomfortable silences and forced conversations about safe topics. Soccer, the weather, the 9 o'clock soap opera. After eating, my father invited me to see his new project in the backyard, a small workshop he was building to store his tools. "I got the idea from your grandfather," he commented, showing me the shelves he had installed. "He always said a man needs a place of his own to think." We talked about wood, tools, carpentry techniques, neutral, safe topics. Until, unexpectedly, my father put his hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, looking at the ground. "Not just of the house, but of how you fought for it." It wasn't an apology. My father would probably never say the words "I'm sorry" out loud. But for a man like him, that was the closest he would ever get to an admission of error. "I learned from you," I replied, "to fight for what's mine." He nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment, and quickly changed the subject to a leak he needed to fix in the bathroom. But something had changed between us. A small recognition, a timid respect. A few months later, Marcia sent me a message. She had found a better apartment, closer to Felipe's school. "The kids miss you," she wrote. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an opening. I invited them over for a Saturday at my house. Felipe ran around the backyard, enchanted by the small garden I had planted. Lucas, still a baby, crawled through the living room, exploring every corner. Marcia was different, calmer, less combative. Maybe time had softened her edges too. "Your house looks nice," she commented, observing the changes I had made. "That yellow wall, it really brings the room to life." "Thanks," I replied. "That means a lot to hear." Today, my house is more than just a shelter. It's a symbol of perseverance, of boundaries, of self-worth. I no longer seek validation from those who denied me. I have what I truly had a right to. Not just the deed to a house, but the peace of mind of knowing that I earned it. I kept it, and I protected it from those who thought I wouldn't fight. My grandfather Geraldo taught me, even after he was gone, that some things are sacred. Not because they are grand or luxurious, but because they represent our dignity, our work, our identity, and that defending those things isn't selfishness, it's self-preservation. The family is still rebuilding slowly. There are scars that may never completely disappear, but there is also a new respect, born from the storm we faced. And, in the end, perhaps that's the most solid foundation on which to rebuild. The truth, however painful it may be, is always stronger than illusions. On the balcony of my house, where jasmine and bougainvillea now grow, I have hung a discreet wooden sign. It was a gift from Uncle João on my birthday. On it is a simple phrase my grandfather used to say, "A house built with your own sweat is a fortress against any storm." And it's true. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is simply saying no and standing firm in the face of the storm that follows.